Welcome to Music Ed Tech Talk, a podcast exploring the topics of music, education, technology, and the intersections between them, with a special focus on the productive and creative process. I'm your host, Robby Burns. Joining me today is Rob Knopper. He is a percussionist in the Metropolitan Opera, and he also runs the Audition-Hacker and percussionhacker, which feature online resources for musicians to perfect their practice and audition process. You can check out all of his fine work and learn more about him at robknopper.com. We talked about a ton of awesome topics in this episode: how to practice with technology, using technology to make content like blogs and videos, how to make practice resources, developing diverse skills as a musician and remaining teachable. We talked about how to find generalized versus specialist teachers and mentors in our musical lives and how to encourage our students to do the same. We talked about comprehensively studying Masterworks and making practice resources to help us discover them more deeply. We talk about acquiring phrasing language, teaching students to recognize mastery in both their performance and their audition tapes, embracing failure, and understanding auditions as part of the process, not a final end product. All of that, and of course, our album and app picks of the week. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. So, I've been following your work for a long time. Your resources have been especially helpful in the private teaching realm.
Oh, cool. I'm glad to hear that.
I've got all of your stuff here. It's great. It's especially good for the high school students who are preparing for college auditions and just getting them to think about things in different ways than are the ways that they or I would even think about things. Those snare drum overlays and the performance recordings and everything are great. Just putting a model right in front of them that's super concrete.
Right. Cool.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that it's helpful. Yeah, thank you.
Since COVID, I've been trying to a little bit more regularly publish. And since before then, thought that it would be fun to just sort of pick your brain a little bit about, there are so many, I think, domains that intersect. There's percussion, there's music teaching, there's all of your work with auditioning. But then there's this whole layer to all the, I'm sure, the tools and the skills you've had to learn to run Audition-Hacker. And
right.
While time is limited, I thought maybe kind of going at the intersections between those things would be maybe the best way to focus our time, if it's cool with you.
Sure, yeah, that sounds good.
I guess I should ask this just right up front. There are lots of places people can find your work online, lots of places people can learn about you. Do you have anything you'd want to say about yourself? I figured I'd give you the floor.
I guess the hub is my website, robknopper.com. So from there you can find audition resources, percussion resources. It has links to my YouTube videos and stuff like that. Yeah, and whatever I put up, I try to put it in a blog post so that would be a good place to at least to start to find my stuff. Sure.
So I guess I should just ask you, as a performer, as someone who's got this business now online, are there technologies or tools that you feel are absolutely essential to your practice routine?
Oh, you mean actually practicing?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so audition prep is a central theme of your work. The act of practicing is something that anyone who wants to know about how you do that can find tons of resources, to what you do on your site. But I'm wondering, are there any particular tools or technologies that you feel you would wish other people, in particular maybe students, maybe even younger students like high school and middle school students, knew about?
Yeah, it's funny because, the parts of my life where I was really intensely practicing leading up, in high school, college, and leading up to my Met audition, the technology to assist us in practicing wasn't that evolved. So I used a Dr. Beat. I used Word documents to keep track of my, my excerpt research notes. I used different Word documents to keep track of my practice schedule. And I used 3x5 note cards to help organize the excerpts that I was working on. Since then, I have completely transitioned my life and note-taking, to Evernote. I do all that on Evernote. And I use... So, when I practice now, to be honest, I still do 3x5 cards, although I usually recommend to students that they do what I do on 3x5 cards on Evernote because there's a lot more, or on some kind of Word document, because there's a lot more, there's a lot more ease in terms of editing and adding different kinds of media rather than just writing on a note card. I guess the thing that I use most in my preparation, my own practicing, is audio equipment to self-record. So I a huge part of my practicing is setting up the mic in a big room at a distance from myself, hooking it up to my computer, putting headphones on, and going through a kind of very high intensity, high deliberate practice style problem solving routine of play, listen, problem solve, play, listen, problem solve, and repeat as many times as it takes until the music starts to sound polished. I think even now, people, even though mics are relatively cheap and you can get a setup like this going, it's just the block isn't the technology. The block is staring at your excerpt undressed in the mirror with nothing to hide behind. There you see every little error and issue with your playing very clearly, and you can't deny it when you're listening back to it in a self-recording way. So that's one of my, I call it one of my secret weapons of auditioning, because so many people get so frustrated and they feel like they're almost in denial. They don't want to look at their excerpt they don't want to listen back. They don't want to analyze it because it's just hard to admit that there's so much going on there that needs to be fixed. So if you can be one of the people who can be persistent, and listen through your excerpt, organize your thoughts in terms of what needs to be fixed, prioritize those issues, and then really attack them one by one until you have a much more polished excerpt and a lot of those issues are dealt with. If you can do that, you have this huge advantage over a lot of people at the audition or, in any playing circumstance that just simply did not have the persistence to push through. Yeah. So, I use tech for that. I use my computer. I used to use this microphone that I'm using right now, which is an Audio-Technica 4040, I think it is. And this is the one I've always used for self-recording. I've since got different ones, but it doesn't really matter, just a decent mic, and setting it up so that you can hear yourself at a distance.
I found that my middle school students in particular, the band students, are shocked the first time they ever hear a recording of themselves. It's it's something I encourage a lot of, and it's not something that they do a lot. It sounds like you're actually almost all the time, or maybe a lot more than one would expect. You're practicing with a microphone in the room. Is that right?
Yeah, there's a whole phase of my audition prep where I'm doing nothing else besides recording myself. So there was a good almost 2-month period of time in my prep for my my big auditions where that was the one task I would be doing all day.
Yeah, we eventually, and I find with the younger students too, is we eventually our ears are trained to hear ourselves more like others would hear us, or like we would hear ourselves if we were listening to a recording. But I guess it's a little interesting that you're doing it so regularly. Do you find that when you're recording that you do, will you listen to every single take, even if you can audibly hear during the actual take some kind of issue?
Normally, so you're talking about the micro details of your actual self-recording workflow, which I think, can vary excerpt to excerpt and person to person potentially. Normally what I'll do is I'll record once and then I'll listen back for the diagnostic and get all the problems and issues out of my head. And then I'll choose one problem and then I'll play it as many times as it takes until I feel like I've solved that problem. And then I'll listen back to the final one. So it might be I'll press record and I might play it 10 times or something. Or I might start at the beginning and then only get to measure 2 and then next time only get to measure 4 and then keep trying and trying until I get the take that I think I've solved it. And then I listen back and see if it actually is solved. There's
a real opportunity here because, I'm thinking about my own private students, many of whom have bought, at least a passable microphone for the purpose of learning online. In my part of Maryland, in my district, we're all learning online in the public school system. So,
right.
Yeah, no, I think that this is encouraging to hear that maybe this is a part that I encourage more often. I'm already, because of the nature of the Google Meet and Zoom calls, telling them, hey, if you can just one, of the... each major instrument, if you can get just before your lesson, one day before your lesson, send me one recording of each major thing we're working on, just so I can get a little bit of a crisper idea. But yeah, I'd love to, begin coaching students through. One of the things we're facing right now is, coaching through students through the technological piece of things can be distracting from the time that we could be giving them to address the musical things. Mm-hmm. But I think that's super valuable. Do you recommend that approach for people who are in earlier stages of development, or is that your last step? before an
No,
audition?
I would have loved to. I would have loved to have discovered this strategy earlier. I mean, it's kind of my fault because my teachers did say you should record yourself, but I didn't understand what that meant, and I hadn't figured out that this workflow and this repetitive, like immediately listening back is what works for me. So it took a long time to discover that. I would have improved, my learning curve would have been so much steeper earlier if I would have done that, So I do think, I think people should do that earlier so that they can have a good idea of what's going on with their playing. Because when you're just playing on your own in the practice room, what I call traditional practice, you, the instrument, the music, you're essentially multitasking. You are driving and texting. You're doing one activity and you're trying to do it great while you're doing another activity. So you end up, spelling all your words wrong and driving off the cliff. You're putting all your mind and focus and energy and effort into the act of execution, which requires its own thoughts. You need to think about the physical and the mental act of executing something. And then separately, you're also trying to listen and analyze what's going on. But if you're doing them both at the same time, you can't do them as well. You're multitasking. So self-recording forces you to simply separate the tasks of playing and listening. And by doing that, you're able to put your entire effort and the power of your intellect into doing a better job on each one.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I want to talk about also just pivoting now, since we're on the topic of like technologies. You are running a website. I know you have a team now that helps you run your website, and you're doing blog posts, you're doing videos. At one point when you were recording on the snare drum, and you have practice resources like snare drum, metronome, play along tracks for you've just got like a lot of resources out there, and you had to make all of these. You have to communicate with your audience. What are some of the technologies that you create content and communicate with people through? So
the technologies, well, it's all the same essentially. The project is trying to harness all the chaotic stream of consciousness thoughts in my brain and turn it into something simple and concise and easily consumable. And so I spend a lot of time in my writing process, like actually trying to organize those thoughts and put them into something that is, like I said, simple and easily consumable by students. So I end up distributing that writing to all sorts of places. That writing is the foundation of, the videos or blogs or social media posts or Instagram posts, or I'm making a new podcast. So whatever it is, it all starts with trying to organize my thoughts first and actually prepare the material. So I guess, for any one of those given formats, I have software that I use, and I have a process, sometimes hardware that I use too. So like for my videos, I have a couple video cameras, some lighting at home, lavalier microphone, and I guess some other stuff just to make that video happen. Then if I'm doing it myself, I bring it into Final Cut, or usually I send it to my video editor, right, who's awesome. And and I think he uses Adobe Premiere. Yeah. This is Adam Tan, the percussionist from Australia, who himself is an amazing YouTuber and percussionist and teacher.
Awesome. I don't know, at which point, which of your blogging and video responsibilities have sort of been expanded. But so you're not doing too much of the video editing at this point. But it sounds like at one point you were doing the whole all of the hardware and software workflow was entirely in addition to preparing to record. Which was its own process, which you sort of touched on.
Yeah. Well, it's what was funny was, so after I started my job at the Met, I had about 2 years where I almost thought of it as my personal, secondary undergrad, where I just had all these interests, that I had put to the side a little bit and in favor of, preparing for auditions and trying to actually get a job. And so I started taking a lot of classes. I took an audio production class. I took 2 photography and video classes. I took songwriting. I was taking guitar and voice lessons. I was just all over the place, kind of pursuing all these random things. And a whole bunch of them have been I didn't know it at the time, but a whole bunch of them have been incredibly useful for this project, because now I know how to set up my video camera and like adjust the buttons and focus and make lighting. I mean, it is not like professional quality. Like you would never see anything that I do in like a shot of a real movie or anything like even close to that. But it is certainly, I think, like a step ahead of where it would be if I hadn't done that kind of work on my own.
Why is it that only you mentioned songwriting, and I'm not, maybe I'm jumping to some conclusions about like where you learn some of these other skills, but like it seems to me like only songwriters and pop musicians think about recording and technology for like getting from point A to point B. Like it's
interesting. I don't know.
I don't know. I mean, it's certainly something that's changing. It seems like, for me, I know like when I learned a little bit about recording and engineering, and like it was entirely in that context. Like I had to go outside of classical everything. Like definitely none of that was taught at my music program. A little bit, like you could learn how to like manipulate an audio file in GarageBand, but I think that this is sort of an interesting pivot maybe to a question that, and I talked to a handful of local area percussionists and teachers and asked for some of their questions maybe that I could bring up to you, and something that a lot of people kind of came at this in a different way, but I'm going to try to like sort of bend all of these questions into one thing that sort of relates to, you know, all of the things that you're doing that are adjacent to just simply the act of performing. I'm also going to kind of relate this a little bit to the current situation of the world that's happening right now.
So we can cover all that in one question.
Sure. I'm going to do my best. Like, I think, and I might have to do a couple, I might pause and do a couple of takes of this question, because this question is inside of me right now. I just need to figure out how to give you the floor here to go at this for a little bit, because I see what you do, how you've, you know, expanded your business, how these other skills that you've acquired. And you know, I see I would imagine that someone who has learned how to learn can, you know, we know that they can do anything that they want to do if they chase that skill, if they have that concept in their brain that they're after. It seems like once you've learned how to learn something, you really like can kind of just pivot anywhere. A lot of performers right now, it's a messy situation out there right now for performers. A lot of musicians in the area that I know that are friends of mine have sort of sidestepped or like refocused or re-envisioned how they want to use those skills. Some people I know have pivoted entirely into other professions, and there just seems to be like this resiliency and flexibility amongst musicians who don't see playing their instrument as like their one core set of skills. So I guess if I can try to find the question in here, like what advice do you have, particularly to people who are career seeking, like young, like college, university students, people who are maybe at a conservatory program, or even younger, high school students who want to go the musical path? What kind of advice can you give to them about remaining teachable and flexible so that, you know, when life sort of throws them stuff, they're able to find a path that is the best path for them, that helps them to like really have a voice, but also, you know, be appropriately reactive to the circumstances? Did I get that out okay?
Yeah. So let me try. So, well, first of all, I mean, I think all of the, you know, the aspect that you're talking about the importance of learning how to learn, and I think there's a certain element that I see with people who do online teaching work as like a fearlessness of like, I don't know how I'm going to figure out how to do this technical thing, but I'll figure it out. Like there will be some solution. I just have to like Google it for a while or whatever. There's kind of a fearlessness to it. And I think that is really important, and it doesn't really have anything to do with the pandemic. Right. I mean, you know, yeah, like the pandemic has been an interesting like instigator for people to like jump into other things and learn new skills. It's actually been really exciting. Like a lot of my friends who maybe never had time to put some awesome idea into you know, resources available online or something have been doing it. And I love it. I see the pandemic as a pause. I see, you know, essentially the forces that led to our music performance industry before the pandemic as still being there, you know, the underlying forces of human beings want to listen to classical music. Classical music is an important part of, American culture, and there is a need for it. And I don't know about you, but like I'm already planning like all the partying I'm going to do after the pandemic is over. And so as soon as things start getting back to normal, and we don't know what route that will take exactly, but performing will go on, and who knows, maybe like audience members will have to wear masks, or who knows what that means in the future, but performing will come back. But also the previous version of our industry where, which is very traditional, and it was easy to look at the traditional tracks as the only tracks. That kind of context still exists, that culture of doing it the same way that it's always been done. And I think it's pretty interesting to use this time to think about, even before the pandemic, how can the music industry be better? How can we serve all the needs within the music industry better? And I think, one of the things that is a goal of mine is I want to fill a need, the need being that the younger version of me, the version of me who was growing up in rural Michigan, who was desperately craving, information and resources and guidance on auditions and percussion and anything, I want to provide those resources to that person. That there's thousands of that kid, around the country and the world, and they're out there looking for resources just like I used to be. And so I want to like deliver them resources. And when I was thinking about starting my audition hacker program, that was the main driving force. It was just thinking, well, you shouldn't have to go to a music conservatory you shouldn't have to be able to pay to go to a music conservatory, or you shouldn't have to travel. You shouldn't have to be held back from experiencing these resources or having the right information. And so I thought, okay, well, why don't I use some of these other technological skills that I've been working on to try to deliver those resources to people who need it. And I think it's kind of like a good time to think about, okay, the culture of going online and doing things online is getting more and more, normalized. Music performance is getting normalized online. I don't really know how that turns into sustainability, but the point is that the need is there. The need for people to experience, live classical music because they love it. They want it in their ears. They want to feel that feeling of being in a performance where some people are performing. There's that need. There's the need of music students who are struggling with things. And there's more needs. There's the need of music teachers who are figuring out how to teach. There's the need for beginner students and parents sometimes. And we can use all of this technology to serve the need. It's not about the technology. It's about serving the need and filling in a gap that the previous version of the music industry just wasn't particularly well, serving as well as it could be. I see so much opportunity for people who have expertise and who want to, to teach in the same way that I teach, about Audition Hacker. The music industry, the music education industry, to me is kind of traditional in that it's sort of like, in medicine, if you were to think about when you go to the doctor, first you go to your general practitioner for general stuff, like full body examination. And then if you have a problem, they send you out to a specialist. And in the music industry, music education, we have our general practitioner, our teacher, right? Our main teacher. And that's it. That is literally it. If we're having some specific kind of issue that's specialized or having to do with an expertise that our teacher isn't particularly well suited to teach, well, good luck. You have to figure it out on your own. You might have to ask your friends. In some cases, the culture kind of dictates you're not even allowed to take a lesson with the second teacher if your first teacher doesn't approve of it. I mean, I think that's all ridiculous. That's crazy. There's no reason for that at all. And I love the ideas of apprenticeship and deep learning with your main teacher, but that doesn't mean that your main teacher is best suited to teach you everything on earth. So there's so many unaddressed specialties in music right now. There's like, and I'm working with, I've started this program called Academy Builder, where I'm working with a bunch of amazing music educators who have all decided to start trying to fill in these gaps. So, there are people trying to serve the needs of string quartets who are looking to get better at their rehearsal skills, Baroque instrument specialists, certain aspects of playing like breath control that you would work on it with your teacher in some cases, and some teachers are better at teaching certain things than others. But sometimes you just need a specialist to dive in deep into a topic that you don't have as much expertise in, and it's just not getting better with your teacher. It's a supplemental part of your education that's missing. And so I think that like right now is like kind of this almost revolution of change to music education, that so many teachers with expertise are basically creating this specialization component of the music education industry. Like as we speak, you see it, like things are going up all the time. It's really interesting. And it's exciting because students who are, that kid out in rural Michigan, the struggling kid, will have more resources for the things that, he or she is struggling with. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, in the internet-based model of all of the things, but teaching in particular, has definitely really just blown open the doors. Like you can have, I was listening to, I gotta remember, I'll put it in the show notes if I can remember, link to the podcast, but it was a podcast that was actually like addressing like social media, which is, you would think is not related to this conversation, but it was sort of talking about this idea of sort of like the 2.0 of social media is no longer, like if you think of a Facebook group as being like the 1.0 of social media, we just took the real world and we just digitized it, like you already have these groups in your life and now you just interact with them on a website. Whereas like this social media 2.0 almost being this place where like all the different services and offerings that are on the internet can provide you with different avenues of self-expression and engagement. Mm-hmm. So like you can be one person and get one kind of thing and learn one kind of skill over here that you could not possibly do, because like I guess the example that was given in the podcast was Twitter. Like Twitter is an example of a social media website where it's like you purposefully do not interact with people that in the real world. Right. And so this sort of idea of like just having the technology make new possibilities, not just sort of like digitize old ones. And I think online learning has certainly blown open the doors. I mean, you can take a private lesson with people now that you maybe couldn't before due to travel restrictions or for any other kind of reason. Ben Thompson is the guy. That's who I was trying to think of who did the podcast. I'll link it in the notes. Cool. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. You hit on something that was actually another listener recommended question, which is just to kind of talk generally about just studying with. I mean, you hit on it. Studying with a diverse range of teachers. I am not really teaching any private students who are above the age of about 18. When do you suggest if someone's auditioning to study music, I start to like encourage them to at the least reach out to the local greats, people who are teaching at all the local universities and conservatories, people who are in the local service bands, people who play in the local orchestras, just taking as many lessons as they can, understanding the expectations of these different percussion programs. Do you feel like there's a time that's too early to start doing that, or where you're maybe like is there a role for like having one teacher who's sort of like guiding you along this fundamental technical skill development path, or is it like should you be doing that at an earlier age, do you think?
Good question. If I am working on my four-stroke roughs are one of the banes of my existence. And, it starts, key G starts with one and all sorts of, pieces, Delacluze etudes and different things have four-stroke roughs in them. And they're so complicated and they're so difficult. And you can think about them in all sorts of ways. You could think about the way your hands are holding the stick and the spacing of the notes and the way the notes grow. And everybody has found different solutions to their problem of four-stroke roughs. If you were to talk to every, IXOM orchestra percussionist, every percussionist of a great American orchestra, they would all have a different perspective on four-stroke roughs because the way their mind works, everybody's mind works in a different way. And the way your mind works means that something you're missing something, and your route to learning how to play four-stroke rough, some aspects of it come easily and some aspects of it take longer or are less are things that you grasp less naturally. And when I was going through my education, whether it was, four-stroke roughs or any other aspect of playing and musicality and everything, I always felt like I want to just get all the information. I want to collect everybody's idea on how to play four-stroke roughs. I want to see exactly how they're gripping the sticks. I want to see exactly what angles their hands are using. Because first of all, I want to know, the range of what's appropriate. Am I really not allowed to turn my hands so that my thumbs are up like timpani grip? Is that really wrong? Or is that just that I haven't ever seen anybody do that? And how does everybody tends to teach in the specific way that their brain works. So I wanted to get all of those options and just process them and figure out, some aspects of what somebody will say will be really helpful. And my playing now is basically a Frankenstein, collection of all sorts of different concepts and guidance and direction from all sorts of different teachers. I really thrive in that environment. I want to get just huge amounts of information. I want to read 10 books on the topic. I want to listen to everybody's Delacruz album if they were to have it. And so I really, really love the idea that I could provide just another option for students who are like me, who need to hear other perspectives on any given topic. On the other hand, there's no substitute for having somebody take you under their wing, take responsibility for you, and treat you like you're the apprentice. And I was really amazingly lucky to have people like that when I was in high school. My teacher Brian Jones took me backstage at the Detroit Symphony concerts. I went over to his house and spent hours in his basement learning from him, watching him play. And, one of my teachers, Michael Udow, who was the faculty at University of Michigan, came over to our house and actually sat down with me and my dad and went over all the colleges and who was teaching there and what the pros and cons were. And it was amazing. You have to have that kind of deep guidance from teachers. So I don't really think it's an either or thing. I think you should have your main teacher, or, in my case, I had two teachers actually who I felt like were the ones guiding me in high school. I switched around teachers in college, but I had one main teacher at a time, and I would take lessons outside the same time. I think both are important. I mean, if you're committed to learning, and I have an obsession with learning. I want to have a deep apprentice-like relationship with my teacher and get all sorts of other options, right, on the side. Yeah.
Right. It's interesting to hear you talk about the four-stroke rough. When you said earlier, find a specialist, I'm thinking like a drum set guy, not like a very specific technical skill guy, like a person who's just going to make that one thing sound good. But it makes sense, that's to come back to the medical analogy, it's like, yeah, you want someone who's going to be able to help you diagnose a problem if you're having one. Right.
Yeah, like a role person, or like a, performance anxiety person, or, I don't know, like a musicality on mallet instruments person. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. So you did make mention of the Delacruz recordings that you did, and I kind of hinted at, I didn't actually mention it by name at the beginning, but we were kind of talking about it towards the very beginning of our conversation. So this is something that on Andrew Hitz's show, you kind of talked about wanting to, you didn't have this model for this piece that was like standard repertoire. So, and you wanted other percussionists to have this. So, you professionally recorded them, which is awesome. I love that recording. But you didn't stop there. You made tons of these sort of auxiliary practice resources. You made metronome play along tracks. I'm a huge fan myself of making metronome play along tracks for solving various problems, giving to my students, giving to my band kids. I guess one of the people who I asked, do you have any questions, was just wondering, every percussionist has had to play those snare drum solos at one point, but there's a lot of other stuff out there that would be considered a masterwork. Have you considered going to that level? I mean, you also interviewed him in his home, you know what I mean? Is there any other piece of music in the percussion repertoire that you've considered kind of just like comprehensively studying and making like resources for?
I would love to, man, I would love to do what I did to the Delacluse, but for everything. I mean,
Right.
that's my dream. You know, I want to make it easier to learn music and to develop as a percussionist. And so I have to find the time to do all that, you know. But the next piece that I have a dream to do that with is the Bach violin sonatas and partitas, actually. I want to, you know, I had a big mental block about how to phrase, and I didn't really know where to start. I didn't know strategies to actually develop my phrasing. I didn't know how to draw shapes. I didn't know how to make it sound natural. I didn't know how to bring in rubatos and time manipulation. And so I have like developed some strategies that are like crystal clear, and for me they feel like kind of foolproof methods to learn those pieces, to trust that your hands are going to do the right thing, to play them musically and naturally. I want to learn them all, and I want to make, you know, similar kinds of resources for musicians. We all have to learn at least some of those at some point. So that would be a big dream of mine. Of course, I want to do it with the excerpts too, you know. Yeah.
Those it's interesting because those both seem like much more ambitious projects, and for like very different reasons. Like I think of like solo violin or solo cello, like anything Bach. Like I just love it. You know, like you have to really draw from such a wider range of influence. We know how many different recordings how many different violinists you can hear playing any one of those, and that's not to mention that there's probably is not an instrument that some of them have not been played by. So to just draw from all that influence and then figure out, it sounds like also maybe you're experimenting with some sort of like methodical like phrasing system for like annotating the music. Am I reading wrong into that, or?
Yeah, it's more of a, you know, it's more of a system of acquiring phrasing language. I think of phrasing as a language. So if you're listening to a recording, you know, say you're listening to a Hilary Hahn recording of, you know, some of my favorite recordings of Bach, and you hear something interesting like, oh wow, she's holding out that note there. Why is that? Why does that sound so cool and interesting? And then, you know, the way we kind of teach and experience that in music is like, you should go to a lot of concerts, you should listen to a lot of recordings, and then here, play these pieces. And it's almost like you expect the students to like acquire this phrasing language through osmosis. Like, how are they actually going to learn to apply it? Well, they learn to apply it through having the opportunity to play it wrong, you know, improvising, and a lot of the versions that you play will be wrong, and adjusting it and manipulating it, listening back to recordings. And so I think that there are deliberate strategies, you know, that I use and that students can use to acquire the language of phrasing and learn to essentially speak the dialect of Bach, or speak the dialect of, you know, different genres of music. And phrasing, especially for percussionists, it feels like something that is very, very difficult to develop naturally, and to develop a really natural, beautiful, high level, elite level, you know, polished understanding of and ability to manipulate, where you're actually helping the listener have an emotional experience. And so often percussionists, like, we almost just avoid it because we're like pursuing precision. And so, yeah, I mean, I want to help people learn to be musical players, and I think very methodically. And so the strategies that I would use to teach are very methodical in terms of how to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, that idea you talked about with private teachers and trying to grab as many ideas as you can is something that I have found has been useful for these Masterworks that have been with us for so long and just so loved by so many different kinds of musicians. What effective for me is usually to just photocopy the music, and I'll have, with some of that music in particular, like I'll have them find my students find like 6 or 7 different recordings, and like find 6 or 7 different colors of colored pencil, and like, can we annotate the same score with like all the phrasing markings? Where I get hung up is my system for phrasing markings is like not really locked down. It's like, some of my younger students if they had something a little bit more concrete, I feel like it would help them considerably.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. You know, we don't really have a way there's no alphabet for phrasing, the language of phrasing. You can draw an arrow, you can draw like a hairpin. You can draw a curved line, but there's no way, like, I've like tried, there's no way to actually take a Hilary Hahn recording and actually write out everything that she's doing. Every language has limitations. There's more in English than we're able to write down using the alphabet. There's so much more to music than we can write down using the notes and the markings that are on music. But phrasing is like an extreme version of that. Like, we almost have nothing to write that with. And so, yeah, that is kind of a limitation. But, I think there's the tabuto method where, the I think Philadelphia Orchestra oboe player from back in the day who would use numbers to indicate energy rising and falling. And I've experimented with lots of like systems of arrows and colors and all sorts of things. But yeah, you're right. It's totally underdeveloped.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. I mean, at its most basic level, one of the local band directors has a good thing that, and I'm talking like this is useful for like a middle school band, but it's like as simple as like putting stars over important notes and then arrows like sort of where the music feels like it's moving to and, from these key moments. And then how you get there is, I guess, just then a matter of discussion if there's no formal way to write it down. All right, cool. That's super interesting. Let's see. Let me just kind of dig through some questions here. We talked about practice resources. So, I mean, this is something that's I'm thinking about more because more of my students are auditioning online this year than have ever before. I mean, certainly like pre-screening tapes are things that have existed long before we had a pandemic situation. But I do find that because everyone has sort of been like forced into a situation this year where they are recording themselves to some degree, and because, at the public school, all the way down to the public school level, but of course I'm also thinking about students who are thinking of studying music, there's a little bit of like a graciousness that I read from the expectations of these performance auditions, but not everyone has the same equipment. Not everyone has the same resources. Not everyone has the same skill with recording themselves on video. So I guess you can tailor this question specifically to like the current time we're in, or just more broadly. I mean, like how do you encourage a young student? I'm talking like an 18-year-old or even like a 12-year-old student who's auditioning for their local all-state band. Like, how do you encourage them to feel confident that what they have recorded is the best take that best represents them and the best of the resources they have available to them?
Gosh, how do you instill confidence in a young musician in any situation is a hard question. It's hard to gain that confidence. You build that confidence over time with experiencing something repetitively, seeing feedback, and learning to trust yourself that the work you're doing is the best you did before. Sometimes the only way I can have confidence still is when if I'm practicing something, I have to compare it to a previous version from earlier in my life. And then I'm thinking, this is definitely not that good. I'm not solving enough problems. I have all these issues going on. And then I compare it to something from earlier in my life and I'm like, things have improved. Cool. That's awesome. I think it's important for musicians of any age to know that as awesome as it would be to expect idealism in terms of, an audition committee judge listening to their recording without paying attention to the technology or the video quality or the audio quality, just listening to the playing, that's great. That would be awesome if everything could be ideal like that. But that's just not a realistic expectation. You, the musician, are responsible for the final product. You're always the producer. It's true even in live performance. You're not just responsible for your instrument. You're responsible for how the listener experiences your instrument. So you actually have to change your playing depending on what size room it is, what chamber ensemble you're playing with, what size chamber ensemble. You're going to play a forte different if you're in an outdoor venue with no mics than if you're playing in, a very wet hall with an immediate response. And so you always have to adjust your playing to change the listener's experience. And that just increases, the complexity of that increases when you're making a video or audio audition tape or when you're playing an audition over Zoom. So, I've listened to people play an audition. this is before the pandemic, but they'll send in an audition tape and they'll play, and there will literally be like, a parent sitting on a couch in the background, like moving around. It's like, I get it. You're busy at your house, but you know what? That is distracting. And I'm not saying like a committee judge should take that into account, but ultimately it's your responsibility to do everything under your control to make the listener's experience as good as it possibly can be. You're essentially the producer of the experience. So that means, you should think about framing, your Zoom screen. What is all the way on the left? What's all the way on the right? Is it clear? Is it well lit? Is there something distracting that will affect the viewer and their experience? For audio, if you are using your computer mic, it's not going to be as good of a product, and if you use some kind of external mic. You should practice. You should explore, put your mics in different places. You could do this on like a recorded Zoom, test it on your own. Place the mic right by your computer and then say a few words like, testing mic by computer, and then play a few notes, and then put it in like 6 different places and put it on at different heights off the ground, closer, farther from your instrument, because again, you're responsible for the listener's experience and how they hear you're playing over Zoom. And because, okay, a listener in any circumstance, they're listening to an audition tape or an audition over Zoom or whatever, they can tell themselves, I am trying to just listen to the playing. I'm trying to see through all the distractions and just listen to the playing. But if somebody comes and the playing is great and it's obvious that they've thought through all of these other aspects, it is incredibly impressive, and it'll score you points. It just will.
That's exactly how I explain it to my students. It's like if you are even with another person and they have better lighting than you and a better microphone placement, it's impossible for someone to ignore. We had some auditions that took place locally for the younger students in our district where they said that the mallets and the timpani were optional. I'm talking about for like some local honor bands that ended up taking place virtually. And, a couple of my students were like, well, I think I might be able to like get into the band room to do the timpani. And I'm like, listen, like, they told you it's optional, but like you could play the snare drum part just as good as someone else. And if they have timpani, like that's more information for the judges to use. So yeah, if you can get on timpani, do it.
Right.
All right. I don't know. I feel like this question could be dense, but I don't know. You can give the shortest answer you feel like is appropriate for this. There was something that really stuck out to me in the Hitz interview that she did. You were talking about failure in auditions as a much more process oriented, like you perceive them as part of the process. And so they give you information. And while sometimes they, a failed audition could feel like a letdown, at the same time, it's also, an important part of getting better. I thought this was really interesting. I teach and preach to the best of my ability that it is, all about the journey, not about the concert, the performance, about the glory of being on stage and people clapping for you. I try to think as much about that process of getting better as possible in my own performing and teaching. But an audition does carry with it, some weight. Like it's, you get the gig or you don't. Like you might have a real strong desire to have a certain job. Like I want to play in this orchestra. I want for the next 4 years of my life to be at this school. So how do you reconcile this idea? Because I agree with you, like auditions are part of the process. You do get valuable information and learn from them. But how do you reconcile that with the fact that they are also these sort of like potential turning points in someone's life?
I don't think I've actually come up with a strategy to avoid feeling disappointment after an audition rejection.
Yeah.
It always sucks. It just always does. Even if you like didn't practice at all and that you did really badly and you like messed up on every single excerpt, you still have that feeling underneath when the orchestra manager comes out that you want them to say your number, and it just doesn't feel good when they don't. The feeling that you get after the audition is unavoidable, but it's also not only negative. It is a lot of negative, but that negativity is something that can transform into the best decisions that you've ever made. You know, when you play an audition and it doesn't go well, those are the times when you can choose to do something differently, when you can choose to change your approach to something. Those were, you know, I think back to my auditions, not in terms of which ones I lost and when they were, but in terms of which ones led me to individual decisions. Like the Buffalo audition in, I think it's 2008, led me to adding self-recording to my audition preparation. The New World audition in 2009 proved to me that mock auditions were a successful aspect of my audition preparation process. There is no bigger indicator than the data you collect from an audition as to the fact that it's time to try something new and experiment and do something in your audition preparation that might change the outcome for the next time.
Yeah, it makes sense. Well, and you know, it's like you think about a performer's life is just lots of those data points spread out on a really, really, really big, long chart. And
right.
I myself, you know, as someone who's been trying to practice meditation, speaking of like other kinds of adjacent things that one might explore, you know, I am trying to just find like out every day how to be just a little bit more like aware of my surroundings, but not having them totally alter. I mean, we can't avoid the associated emotions, as you've said, but not having them like totally transform my behaviors, just having that sort of gentle awareness of them and then using that information non-judgmentally of myself to inform how I'm going to behave in the future.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
But when you're talking about auditions, you're just looking at that idea that I just explained on a much broader and larger and longer scale, which is inspiring to think about.
Anyone could do it. Like it's not something that only, you know, elite players are doing. It's like one of the biggest character traits that I see in successful players is the persistence and the creativity of when they get an audition rejection, they don't let it knock them on their butt. You know, they use it as an inspiration to try something new.
Yeah, very well said. Do you have time to do like an app and an album pick of the week, or do you need to jet?
Sure. Yeah. A few minutes. Yeah.
Do you want to do app or album first?
Yeah. So there's an album that was really like kind of life-changing for me and helped my interest in classical music take off. I'm a big fan of progressive rock from the 70s. That's kind of my home turf in terms of the music that I love. And so lately, so my wife's pregnant right now. We're having a baby soon next month.
Oh, awesome. Congratulations.
Thank you. It's going to be great. Her name is Lily. Yeah. So we've been like playing different music around the house just to see like what gets the baby excited. So I played this same album for the baby, and she started like moving and kicking up a storm. So I'm excited that it seems like it's also maybe her favorite album too. So the album is Pictures at an Exhibition by Emerson, Lake and Palmer. One of my favorite ever albums. So it's this band, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, where they go into these long jams that are kind of based on the various movements of Pictures at an Exhibition. It's awesome. Like, it's an amazing album. So yeah, we've been listening to it a lot at home lately because Lily likes it.
That's so awesome. I have an 11-month-old, and he is the coolest. And yeah, I remember just doing the excitement of that process. And my mom got us like these baby headphones that you stick on the belly. And I don't know. There's some science. There's some good science behind that, I guess. But
cool.
Like
okay.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. And we would just play, you know, I made a giant baby playlist, and I'm like, it's got to have a little bit of everything. And she's like, all right, I don't know. I mean, like small steps. But we would all, you know, then I would always try to at least play like the opening recording from the earlier like Goldberg Variations recording, because I was like, well, that's like many an album that has influenced me. And I was like, if there's, you know, one thing that I feel like I want him to recognize when he's born, that would, you know, something from that would be it. And yeah, definitely. Like we believe, as, and, you know, many people like see their young children's behaviors and interpret meaning from them that maybe isn't there. But I believe that there was a recognition of that opening from before he was born. It's just interesting.
Yeah, awesome.
It's just so exciting.
I refuse to admit that any of my projected understanding of what Lily means by her movements isn't correct. I think all of my understanding is exactly right, and I'm refuse to hear any other opinions or science on that.
I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
This is super hokey. I made an Apple Music Christmas playlist, and I'm gonna link it in the show notes. I'm trying. I'm like a little bit of a jolly guy this time of year. I like to be festive, but that said, there's I'm trying to find music that I would listen to if it weren't December, and then put it in that playlist, and that's the goal. And it does at a certain point. It's just interesting to see like what to me at least speaks as like music that's authentic and true to itself, like regardless of what the melody is or like the lyrical component. Something like the Oscar. I'm going to sort of do a pick within a pick. I'm going to actually choose the album. The Oscar Peterson Christmas album is every single track of that record is on this playlist, and just something the playing style, the harmonic language, and this is true of a lot of big band and also like small combo jazz too, is I just think a lot of these charts are like it doesn't really matter what the melody of the tune is, like the harmonic language and the improvisation style and the personality that is behind so many of these improvised solos is just so unique to the musicians themselves that it like doesn't really matter that it's Jingle Bells.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. We've been doing Christmas albums, so I'll have to check that one out.
Sweet. So is there like an app of the week, something that you've been using that's been helpful to you, useful, you're excited about it?
There's something I'm excited about. I haven't fully explored whether it works or it will take off, but I've had some nice success with it. So I use this app for my Korean studying called Anki, A-N-K-I. It's a memorization app. It has this specific, style of spaced repetition where it's basically a flashcard app, but it spaces out the reviews of when you review a certain piece of information, and it kind of manipulates your brain to force you to retrieve the answer to that flashcard at specific spacings depending on how well you've memorized it so far. So the idea being like, if you have like 100 words to learn, it will space it out in this way that makes it most likely for you to like immediately like memorize them as fast as possible. And it's really effective for that. I've been experimenting with it in music. So, for memorization issues and mind memory slips. So I'll put in a couple measures of music, the sheet music, and the flashcard will be what happens after this. And then I'll put in the audio of a couple measures and it'll be what happens after this. And the idea being, if you can do that kind of work, first of all, just the act of cutting up your sheet music and cutting up the recording into all those flashcards will help you understand the layout of your piece a lot better. And secondly, going through the process of forcing yourself to retrieve the memory, the memories of what comes next will strengthen those neural pathways so that you can actually have a chance of having many fewer memory slips or no memory slips. So I did this, one time in one of my La Boheme stage bands where we have to memorize. And, there's also like a ton of other extraneous factors. I'm playing in traditional grip, you're marching, you're in costume, you're walking downstairs. All the phrases are like not in 8-bar phrases. They're like 9-bar and 11-bar and 13-bar. And it really worked incredibly well. So I'm kind of excited at the possibility of what this could mean if there were a way for it to be an option for musicians who struggle with memory issues. So I think it just there's a lot of potential there.
Is the app for specifically learning Korean and you've somehow hijacked it for this purpose, or is it an actual tool designed to like you sort of insert your own learning into it?
It's just a flashcard app. So language learners use it. I think doctor or like medical students use it because they have to learn like tons of information and memorize it. I'm sure there's other industries that use it, but yeah, it's a flashcard app essentially.
What is the name of it?
Anki, A-N-K-I.
Oh, you said that right. Anki. Yeah, this sounds so familiar to me. This is very, very cool. All right, awesome. I'm going to pick one I'm going to actually ask you if you've heard of this, and if you haven't, then I feel like this is something you would dig. Are you into SoundSource? Have you heard of that one?
Somebody just told me about SoundSource very recently. I don't remember who or why, but yeah, I saw something about that. I haven't studied it too much. No.
So repeat dedicated listeners will actually, by the time that I published this a few episodes ago, will have been an interview with Paul Kafasis, who is the CEO of an indie app developer for, they make all sorts of really, really great audio apps for the Mac. The company is called Amoeba. And we just kind of talked about his apps and that company and like how I'm using them, because a lot of them are incredibly useful for virtual learning. And so if you listen to that episode, we talked about this. I'm going to talk about it again because it's my pick of the week. And actually, it might have even been a recent pick. I don't care. SoundSource is killer. So what it is it's like kind of a replacement for the audio, the little like speaker icon in the menu bar of your Mac where you like click it, you get a couple like your inputs and your outputs, and you can control the volume. What it does is you install this program, and then it like shows up in the menu bar. And when you click it, you don't just have access to a couple of basic things like volume control. You have access to everything that is in the audio part of the system preferences of your computer. So you've got like input, output, sound effects, and then you have an individual mixer of app output for every single running application on your computer. And you can actually run third-party audio plugins through the output of individual applications, all from this like little menu bar widget thing. I'm calling it a widget because it's just sort of like when you click on it, it's just like a little pop-up, like a little square pop-up. But like a creative use that I did for this recently is I was doing an online lesson, and I was trying to have, actually, like we were saying earlier, I was having a snare drummer try to think about different ways of playing Scheherazade, the excerpt. And we were just listening to a bunch of recordings in a program called Adagio, which is, the classical streaming music service. And I found this older recording that was from like the 20s, and it had a crackle to it, and it was super distracting, especially with the added, I'm streaming it over the Zoom call, so it's like just not really listenable. Well, I was able to take a plugin I have that I use for the show that takes the noise out of the background, and I was able to apply the plugin to the output of Adagio so that it like found the crackle in the recording and then fixed it before routing it to his end of the Zoom call.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
It was pretty cool, and it's all like done through this. Like you can literally set a keyboard shortcut for it. Mine is like Option S for SoundSource. So you just like tap it, and then you've just the power is at your fingertips.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing.
Kind of a neat thing.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I want to be conscious of your time. I appreciate it so much. This has been fun. Like I said earlier, I could probably like. I have so many other things I'd love to talk about, but I admire all of your work. I love it. Are there places any listeners, other than what you already said, would want to find your work online or learn more about you, or just any closing words you want to share?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I really think it's awesome what you're doing, trying to help people learn about, new possibilities with tech and how that could apply to music education. So thank you so much for having me on the show. I had a great time chatting about this, and yeah, I really appreciate it.
Yeah. My pleasure. I'm Robby Burns. Thanks for listening to Music Ed Tech Talk. You can find the show's page, show notes for this episode, and my blog at musicedtechtalk.com. You can subscribe to blog posts through an RSS app of your choice, and you can subscribe to the podcast in the podcast app of your choice. You can also now get blog posts delivered right into your email inbox once a week in a newsletter. Please rate and review the show in the podcast app of your choice. It absolutely helps, and it'll only take a second and a few taps. Word of mouth is helpful too, so please spread the word about the show. Learn more about my music and teaching career at robbyburns.com. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and SoundCloud at Robby Burns. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.